All right, if you've got an international environmental law exam on the horizon, then you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're going to really unpack the sources of IEL, and we're zeroing in on a concept that's incredibly powerful, but, often a bit misunderstood: soft law. Let's get right into it. So, what's our game plan? First, we're going to cover the official rulebook, the formal, binding sources of law. Then we'll dive into what you might call the unofficial playbook, soft law. We're going to see why it's such a game changer, how it actually molds formal treaties, and even helps create new customary law. And finally, we'll look at how the lines between the two are getting more and more blurry. Okay, first things first, the official legal sources. Before we can really appreciate all the cool, nuanced stuff in the playbook, we absolutely have to get a solid grip on the foundational rules of the game. And when we talk about foundations, this is it. Article 38(1) of the Statute of the International Court of Justice. Now, since the ICJ is the top court for the UN, its statute gives us the formal list. It's the official starting point for figuring out what legally counts as law between countries. So what's actually in this formal rulebook? Well, these are what we call hard law, sources that create real, binding legal obligations. First up, you've got treaties. These are formal written agreements. Think of the Montreal or Kyoto protocols. Then there's customary international law, which is basically the unwritten rules that come from what states consistently do because they believe they have to do it. Next, you have general principles of law, which are just basic legal ideas that most legal systems recognize. And finally, there are subsidiary sources like court rulings and the writings of top legal experts, which kind of help us figure out what all the other rules mean. Okay, but here's where international environmental law gets really fascinating. That official rulebook, it's not the whole story, not even close. So now, let's get into the unofficial game changer, soft law. This definition, which comes from the work of legal scholar Alan Boyle, really nails it. Soft law isn't legally binding like a treaty is, but, and this is a huge but, it's way more than just a friendly suggestion. These documents are drafted carefully, they're built on consensus, and they use what we call normative language. Basically, they set a standard for how countries should behave. All of this creates a really powerful expectation that states are actually going to follow through. So what does this stuff look like in the wild? Well, it's a whole range of things. You've got famous declarations from huge conferences, like the Rio Declaration from 1992. You have resolutions from the UN General Assembly. You also see codes of conduct and guidelines from expert agencies like the UN Environment Program or the International Atomic Energy Agency. And get this, even parts of binding treaties themselves, like the Paris Agreement, can have flexible, soft obligations mixed in. So this brings us to a really critical question, right? If this stuff isn't legally binding, why on earth is it so important? Especially in a field like environmental law that changes so fast. Well, the first reason is super practical. It is just way easier to get countries to agree on something. When you've got a lot of scientific uncertainty about a problem, or the economic costs of fixing it are a big unknown, states get really nervous about signing a binding treaty. A non-binding instrument is a much lower risk first step. It lets you make progress where a hard law treaty might just completely stall out. Reason number 2 is all about flexibility. The science behind environmental law is always evolving. Our understanding of ecosystems and climate change deepens every year, and soft law can be changed or updated way, way more easily than a formal treaty, which often has these long, complicated amendment processes. That adaptability is absolutely crucial for keeping the law up to date with the science. And the third reason, well, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It bypasses domestic ratification. On the one hand, this is great. It lets states get on board with international norms really quickly, without getting stuck in their own messy domestic politics. But, on the other hand, that lack of democratic oversight can cause real problems down the line. If you suddenly need public money, or you have to pass new national laws to make good on your promise, it can be a tough sell. Plus, what's to stop a new government from just coming in and dropping the commitment entirely? So we see why soft law is useful, but its influence goes so much deeper than just that. Now let's really dig into the powerful ways this soft law playbook directly shapes the hard law rulebook of treaties. This happens in 3 main ways. First, in treaty formation. Soft law often acts as the blueprint. For example, guidelines from the International Atomic Energy Agency were basically the model for the Treaty on Nuclear Accident Notification that was adopted super quickly after the Chernobyl disaster. Second, it helps with treaty interpretation. Soft law can be used to clear up what an existing treaty's obligations actually mean in practice. And third, through what we call codification, where principles from a successful soft law instrument get plucked out and written into a new binding treaty later on. And hey, don't just take my word for it on the interpretation point. This quote is from the International Court of Justice itself, in a big case called Pulp Mills. The court said that even though guidelines from the UN Environment Program weren't legally binding, they were from an expert body and therefore had to be taken into account when figuring out what a country's treaty obligations were. That just shows you how much authority this soft law can really have. Okay, so soft law influences treaties, but it also plays a huge role in shaping another one of those core sources of international law we talked about. It helps forge custom. Now remember, for something to become customary international law, you need two ingredients: widespread state practice and something called opinio juris. That's the belief that the practice is legally required. A soft law instrument can be amazing evidence for both, but it's not automatic. It depends on a few things. Was the instrument widely accepted? Does it use strong law-like language? And maybe most importantly, what was the degree of support? If the countries most affected by the rule were against it, it's probably not going to become custom. This quote just hits the nail on the head. It's talking about the ban on high-seas drift net fishing. Trying to negotiate a global treaty on that would have taken forever, and the key fishing nations might not have even signed it. Instead, a series of UN General Assembly resolutions, which are soft law, built up such a powerful consensus that countries just changed what they were doing. The point is, if the political will is there, soft law can be enough. And if it's not, even a binding treaty might not save you. So as we start to pull all of this together, it becomes pretty clear that thinking in terms of hard versus soft law, well, it's a bit too simple. You really need to see them as part of one big, unified toolbox for making international law work. At the end of the day, the choice is strategic. It all depends on your goal. If what you absolutely need is a clear, enforceable, binding obligation, then yeah, a hard law treaty is the tool you reach for. But if your main goal is to build universal agreement and create a new global norm from scratch, a soft law instrument is often the smarter, more effective play. And if there's one thing you take away from all this, let it be this: effectiveness is not just about legal status. A widely accepted, universally supported soft law document, like the Rio Declaration, can have a way bigger impact on what countries actually do than a binding treaty that only a few countries have bothered to ratify. It's all about influence, not just formal obligation. So that leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. When we're facing huge, urgent global problems like climate change that really demand speed, flexibility, and everybody getting on the same page, you have to wonder, is this more adaptable, consensus-building model the future of how we make international law?